Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our MDICx webinar. My name is Stephanie Christopher. I'm the Program Director for MDIC's Case for Quality, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers in our webinar for today. MDIC is delighted to be able to provide this quarterly update on the CDRH Case for Quality Voluntary Medical Device Manufacturing and Product Quality Pilot Program. This is an ongoing CDRH pilot project, so we're looking forward to being able to provide this venue as a regular opportunity to receive updates on the status of the pilot, what CDRH and our industry participants are learning from it, and what we can expect going forward. For this first quarterly update, we're delighted to have several speakers here with us today. Our speakers include George Zack from Two Harbors Consulting, Kim Kaplan from the CMMI Institute, Joe Friedrich from Boston Scientific, and Francisco Vicenty from FDA CDRH. And with that, I will turn it over to Kim and George, who will start us off on our update. Kim?
Stephanie? All right. So my name is Kim Kaplan. I'm the Operations Manager at the CMMI Institute PMO for this Medical Device Discovery Appraisal Program. And I'm excited to be sharing these updates with you during MDIC's first quarterly webinar on this series. Since we have a pretty diverse audience, I'll start by providing a light background on the Case for Quality and how this program fits into that larger effort. I'll be sharing a status update on some of the metrics for this program, quickly review how CMMI has been leveraged by organizations, and wrap up with a high-level program overview in order to highlight the key lessons learned. On the last slide, I'll also share some additional resources for anyone interested in more details. Okay, and once these slides are made available, you'll be able to access these additional links as well. So in 2011, FDA conducted a study into the quality of medical devices and found no difference in the number of quality issues such as recalls, official actions indicated, et cetera, between organizations with a strong or weak compliance profile. So CDRH launched the Case for Quality to try to understand and fill this gap between compliance and quality. So in 2014, FDA enlisted the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, MDIC, to help foster collaboration between industry, FDA, and third-party stakeholders. In 2015, Deloitte researched 22 different excellence models and chose CMMI because it is the most widely and successfully implemented model. In 2016, MDIC, FDA, and CMMI Institute conducted proof of concept pilots during which we invited stakeholders to observe the process, and there's a link to the outcomes here. And then for the better part of 2017, MDIC held a series of working groups focused on the development of this program, which was officially announced in December of last year. So what is this program exactly? Well, we're leveraging the CMMI framework as a standard by which medical device manufacturers can benchmark their capabilities to produce high-quality products, with the intent being that participants will focus on areas for improvement that make sense to their organization. In exchange, FDA will adjust their engagement with these organizations. So the purpose of these activities is not only to shift industry mindset to quality and innovation, but also to reduce any regulatory barriers to that innovation while increasing overall patient safety. So what does success look like? Well, we've identified several metrics to track the success of this program in its first year. The first category we're focusing on is the value add to participants. Does the appraisal identify opportunities for improvement? Are we reducing the regulatory burden? Are we seeing more innovative changes being submitted? And how do we measure this? Well, right now we're measuring this through post-appraisal surveys and feedback through our regular meetings with participants, appraisers, and FDA. The second category we look at is about sustainability. can we provide consistent and scalable services to participants in this program? We can measure this by looking at the number of participants, the number of appraisals that have been scheduled and conducted, the average wait time for an appraisal, and the number of appraisers trained to accommodate the growing number of participants. The third category is about elevating the industry. And we won't really be able to look at the details of this until closer to the end of the year once we have more data points. But the question is, can we create an industry baseline for organizations in the medical device manufacturing space to benchmark against? And hopefully we'll be able to look at that by starting to trend the participant results and quality performance metrics. So far we have 13 organizations enrolled with 17 facilities. So that means some of the organizations have multiple sites enrolled. This is against our original goal of 30 participants in 2018. So far we're on track to hit that goal. We've completed 6 appraisals so far, with 3 more scheduled for next month. The time from enrollment to the appraisal in terms of days currently ranges from 52 to 144, with a mean of 98 days against our target of 90. In terms of program effectiveness, right now the results are pretty encouraging. These are from our post-appraisal survey results. 91% of respondents agreed that the appraisal identified areas that could improve how to increase product quality. 98% saw no conflict with regulatory compliance. 100% found the appraisal to be of value and would recommend this program. So what is CMMI? CMMI is the Capability Maturity Model Integration. It's an improvement model that can be adapted to solve any issues at any level of an organization in any industry. It's been leveraged by thousands of organizations all over the world who are looking to achieve measurable business objectives. We have many case studies that show quantitative results that organizations have achieved by successfully implementing CMMI Institute's best practices. And you can find these more detailed case studies on our website. So there are many players in the governance of this program, including, of course, FDA, MDIC, and our appraisers. As you can see, each one of these groups has a specific role in the operations of this program. And through various regular meetings that we have, each stakeholder has the opportunity to provide input and feedback. So that way we can continue to improve the operations of this pilot program. All right, what you see here on the left is a high-level overview of the program flow, and on the right are the regulatory modifications that are being considered for this program. I've highlighted the top 3 boxes. These usually occur within the first 5 business days from an organization enrolling, or applying rather. The PMO reviews that application, and FDA reviews it as well to ensure that the organization meets the compliance profile requirements. The next step is within 60 days, the organization is expected to start the appraisal kickoff activities. As you can see, there are a number of activities that go into that on the right-hand side. The highlight lessons learned from the 6 appraisals that have undergone this already is that we've developed a kickoff meeting with organizations scheduled to occur even before their first intake or scoping call in order to help better orient organizations who maybe haven't been following this initiative since 2011 and aren't as familiar with the details of the program. The next step is the appraisal execution. As you can see, we listed our target date of 90 days from enrollment. There are a number of activities that go into this as well that you can see bulleted there. The key lessons learned from this is that we found that organizations are having a little bit of difficulty shifting from an inspection or audit mindset into an appraisal mindset, which is more conversational. So one of the things we're considering is how we can implement sort of a mentorship between organizations that have already gone through an appraisal and organizations that have not yet gone through the appraisal. We're hoping that this can help to foster the community of participants as well. So after the appraisal is completed, those results are submitted to the PMO for review. The average time for this is about 30 days for the review cycle. And as you can see, there are a number of different activities that are associated with this as well. The key highlight here from what we've learned is moving the collection of quality metrics over to FDA and trying to better understand what quality metrics make the most sense for us to be looking at, what makes the most sense for each individual organization, and how to make sure that that activity is not an extra burden to organizations. So I wanted to share quickly an example of what the results could look like from one of these appraisals. On the left-hand side, you'll see the 11 practice areas that are currently in scope for our baseline appraisal. These were derived from the proof of concept pilots in 2016. On the top, you'll see different levels of capability within each of these different practice areas. As you can see, there are 3 types of results that you can receive in each of these boxes: satisfied, partial, or deficient, as to whether or not you're meeting the intent of the model. All of those results roll up into an overall practice area score, which you can see on the right, and all of those percentages roll up into an overall organization score. This is what FDA sees. They don't get to see the level of detail within each of the different practice areas, but we do highlight the number of practices within each of those so that FDA can get a better sense of where that weight is distributed. So I want to bring this back a second to our success indicators. This corresponds to the third one, elevating the industry. How can we create a baseline for the industry for organizations to benchmark against? Well, using that example set of results on the left and on the right, an example set of what the trending of results could look like over time, this sample organization would be at 66%, which is in the second quartile of this box and whisker plot. What that means is that they're doing better than 45% of the industry in this example, but worse than 55%. So they might want to focus on their weakest areas, which in this case would be requirements development and maintenance at the 36%. All right, and after the appraisal is reviewed and submitted to FDA, it's expected that organizations will, on a quarterly basis, conduct checkpoints to provide a progress update and receive feedback from their lead appraisers. The main sort of lesson in learning from these activities is, what does the second appraisal look like, right? We've identified what the first one looks like, but should the second one be different? And does it add value for an organization to look at other practice areas besides the 11 that I've identified? Does it make sense to look at higher levels of capability? So these are things we're hoping to learn more about as we continue to execute checkpoints. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you have more questions or want to see additional details, we have a list of FAQs on the website. Additionally, we've presented more detailed versions of the overview at various meetings, and you can see links to those presentations here. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Kim. With that, I'm going to turn it over now to one of our industry participants to share a little bit about his organization's experience taking part in this pilot project. So I will hand it over to Joe to talk a little bit about his experience from Boston Scientific. Joe?
All right. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Frederick. I'm a quality director for Boston Scientific and had the opportunity to serve as a site sponsor for one of the early appraisals for the CMMI MDICx model. And I was asked to share about my experience and the perspective that we have having gone through the appraisal process and kind of how that compares or differs really from what many of us experience in the industry with, say, FDA inspections or other notified body audits. And just wanted to kind of also articulate why we think this is a really valuable program to be participating in, and you know, kind of the perspective from industry. The corporate sponsor is Connor Dolan. He's our Vice President of Quality Systems for BSC, so Boston Scientific is made up of 6 different divisions with many different sites across the world. And so not only are we looking at it from you know, the experience of what we had in Arden Hills, Minnesota with the first appraisal, but we're also looking at, you know, what this program would look like overall for Boston Scientific. So, all right, sorry. So before I kind of dive in, I wanted to just start off with explaining a little bit about the culture of quality that we have at Boston Scientific. And I'm sure this is probably not too different for many companies in the medical device industry, but it really grounds us and our organization and helps guide our thought process on any endeavor, whether internally or in external partnership. So first we have our quality policy, which is I improve the quality of patient care and all things Boston Scientific. And that quality policy is one that you'll see everywhere across Boston Scientific. The I improve quality is something that is front and foremost in all of our minds, of constantly looking for ways to improve the quality of patient care in everything that we do. In our organizational mission for quality, we exceed expectations with customer-centric quality solutions that transform patient lives. So again, you can see obviously the heavy emphasis on patient lives and wanting to do whatever we can to help improve patient outcomes. The guiding priorities, it's maybe a little difficult to read, but there's a bullseye figure here, and in the center of the bullseye is patient care. And unless we're doing that well, we effectively say that we don't really have right to do much else. So we need to hit the bullseye of patient care and do that as exceptionally well as we can. And of course, quality, compliance, and safety. And then only by doing those things can we go out and work on service improvement, cost reduction, that sort of thing. And then finally, our best four strategy. This is our quality organizational strategy around achieving top quartile performance in the industry across compliance, outcomes, efficiency, and agility. So where are we at? You saw Kim shared the overview of the MDICx process flow, and Arden Hills, since January 10th, we have provided or completed an appraisal at the end of last year in December. We had those results provided to FDA, And then we are coming up to our first checkpoint with CMMI, quarterly checkpoint, on March 2nd, this Friday. And then we're also working in partnership with MDIC, Cisco, and CMMI on putting into place the regulatory benefits that are part of this program, starting off with the 30-day change notice template to go along with the pilot. We have recently enrolled a second site from Boston Scientific, our Clonmel, Ireland facility. As of February 19th, they are in the process, actually as of even this week, they're in the process of working closely with CMMI on preparing for their appraisal, which is what Kim kind of outlined that process. So why did we decide to participate? A number of reasons. First off, we really were drawn to this idea of using a maturity model and practice capabilities in lieu of just a compliance approach to really understand specific areas that our site can work to improve. So that was appealing to us, and it felt like it would be maybe a better way to help identify areas of improvement that could have a true effect on patient outcomes and also potentially be good for our business. The FDA regulatory benefits are significant. First off, the speed of getting improvements implemented is incredibly important to us. The last thing we want to do is have an improvement that is ready to go live, but we have to wait in order to put that improvement into place, into action. So, the opportunity to expedite that is very attractive. And then, of course, the overhead associated with streamlined submissions and faster turnaround, that is also a significant business benefit too, of course. The idea that we can create a relationship with an external partner organization, CMMI, and for that matter, MDIC, that is proactive and focused on continuous improvements in overall product quality and patient outcomes. So, we believe we've got a lot of very talented, smart people in our organization, and we can come up with a lot of great ideas to improve quality and improve patient outcomes. But we also recognize that, there are a ton of other great ideas and great practices that are out there, and by leveraging this relationship, potentially we can gain, better insight, better access to things that are being done really well elsewhere. So that also is very appealing. And then finally, for Boston Scientific, this is an opportunity we see to be part of a shift towards a more patient-centered culture across the medical device industry and with FDA. So we don't want to be on the outside looking in on that. We want to be an active participant in helping shape that. So this slide just provides an overall kind of high-level flow from the Boston Scientific perspective of how the appraisal, planning, preparation, and execution went. Kim, provided the overall flow from the CMMI perspective. So, in the planning, there was 3 two-hour scoping meetings. We defined, which practice areas that would be the scope and practice areas. Obviously, the practice areas are predetermined for the first appraisal, but future appraisals that can change eventually. We defined what the duration of the appraisal would be. We're very large. Arden Hills is, for Boston Scientific, a pretty large site, about 3,000 employees. It's a divisional headquarters for one of the divisions of Boston Scientific, as well as a manufacturing operations location. So quite a bit of complexity involved in that. So our appraisal ended up being 4 appraisers for 5 days, which I think is on the large side. We identified, and this is actually where it took a lot of back and forth and then internal discussions, was to identify who would be the right interviewees for the appraisal. And I'll talk a lot more about kind of the differences between the appraisal process and the like an inspection process with FDA, and having people, how you select the people that you would have take part in that process. And it involved a lot of functions who often are not involved in, say, quality audits, quality inspections. Folks from like PMO, project management organization, R&D, operations, folks who may not necessarily get pulled in on an inspection. So that took a lot of effort, was really just to identify people who could be very good representatives of the process that was being asked about through the appraisal. We looked at for the site coordinator, this was a pretty involved process. So we had one person who was heavily dedicated to putting together the preparation and execution of the appraisal. We had 2 appraisal teams, so 4 appraisers total that came to our site. We had 2 conference room, 1 boardroom, internet projection, of course, and then just provided on-site lunch. In total, we had 31 participants, the one site coordinator, as I mentioned, about 8 hours of active engagement in interviews over the 3 days, 4 hours of what they call the verification process, where they ask if what they heard is correct and giving us the opportunity to provide feedback and alter statements about strengths and weaknesses. And a typical day, was 7:30 to 5:30. There was no backroom, no SOPs, no records, no laptops needed. So that was a very, very new experience for us. So I'll talk more on that in a couple slides here. So product sampling was something that was also a big part of the preparation. For the appraisal team, the product sampling was a means to show that they had appropriate site coverage, so that they wanted to make sure, the appraisers wanted to make sure that they got a good representation of the different product lines that we had at our site, the different types of processes, and the different types of device classifications. So we ultimately landed on a set of products that were designated as good representatives of everything that occurs in our site. And then, for the appraisal site, that product sampling is then how we identify, help to identify the individuals who participated in the appraisal interviews. That also provided the frame of reference to those participants when they were asking or when they were answering questions by the appraisers. So this gives a side-by-side comparison, attempting to show, a CMMI appraisal versus an FDA inspection. So the appraisal for CMMI is a capability maturity model of business practices and processes, whereas an FDA inspection is an inspection of quality system procedures and records. The CMMI appraisal focuses on 11 model practice areas. There are more practice areas available to CMMI, but there's 11 that are selected for these pilot appraisals that are being conducted. Whereas an FDA inspection focuses, of course, on the 21 CFR Part 820 requirements. CMMI appraisers conduct group interviews of what we can call doers responsible for work products. They largely don't want senior site leadership involved in the interviews with minimal exception. It's primarily individual contributors and managers, I would say, who made up the vast majority of the interviewees. Whereas an FDA inspection often has interrogation of quality leaders, process experts, and record owners, many of whom fall within the quality organization. Appraisers engage in discussions to truly understand how the business operates relative to best practices. It's a very flowing, open conversation where an FDA inspection, inspectors review procedures, records, storyboards. They are looking for evidence of noncompliance to regulations. CMMI had a lot of participants outside of QA, where there in the FDA, as I mentioned, very few outside of QA. That might be different for other companies, but certainly at our location, that would be the case. CMMI has minimal disruption in an appraisal to site resources and no need for backroom, front room arrangement, where an FDA inspection, and you'll see in an upcoming slide, of course, there's a large support team with a backroom, front room, streams, scribes, so on and so forth. And in an appraisal, you're provided weaknesses as opportunities to improve business processes. Whereas a FDA inspection are 483s that require escalation in our case to CAPA and of course the formal agency response. So you can see side by side very different processes. And then, you know, what guidance do we provide to our participants? Because those who participate in these interviews, you know, historically, right, the training we give is what we would advise when it comes to an inspection or an audit, and that turned out to be very different to the guidance we provided in participating in the appraisal. So, in an appraisal, be open in answering questions, and it's okay if you're not 100% sure. Where in an FDA inspection, only answer questions asked, and if you don't know, don't guess. It's okay to volunteer information in an appraisal that may be tangentially related to the question. We don't do that in an FDA inspection. In appraisal, we highlight improvements made over time as well as future plans as it pertains to the discussion. In FDA inspection, we don't discuss improvement opportunities or future plans. Appraisals, we explain other systems and tools used to do our work. For example, our product lifecycle process, this framework we call Business Essentials that is a conglomeration of best practices, value improvements, continuous improvement boards, et cetera. Whereas in an FDA inspection, we don't deviate from what is documented in the quality system, policies, procedures, records. In appraisal, there's no need to prepare for the questions, just respond as best you know based on your experience and perspective, whereas there's a lot of preparation that goes into an inspection and being able to make sure that we know what we're going to be presenting and that the facilitators ensure we have the right people answering those questions. Appraisal, we don't bring our laptop, exhibits, any documentation to the interview. They didn't even want us to bring our phones in. It's really just an open discussion, and they didn't want people coming in and out. In inspections, of course, it's focused on the procedures and records, and we might actually bring up a laptop. So huge differences. This I think is hopefully helpful for other industry, either current participants or future participants. You know, when you're helping to educate and explain to your team members the expectations around a CMMI appraisal. So what does it take? Resource allocation, and again, this is for a very large site. Arden Hills, as I explained, is quite involved, a lot of different complexity, to different product lines and divisional aspects, operational aspects. In total, for the 5 days of a CMMI appraisal, our site coordinator certainly had a lot of time, 100 hours total, in preparation and execution of the appraisal. And then for the participants, in total, about 240 hours. So you can see 340 hours was our rough estimate of how much time went into that. Compare that to a 2-day FDA inspection, and it's almost 1,000 hours more than that when you look at all back room, front room, scribe, preparation, execution, so forth. So huge difference. This provides just feedback on the CMMI appraisal that we provided to our appraisers at the end. A lot of positives around the accessibility of the appraisers, their competency at being able to ask really thoughtful questions, even though maybe they weren't experts in the space. Really helpful participant briefing up front that I think helped set the stage for really good discussions throughout the week. Very structured and organized. Valuable use of time. It really didn't pull on participants' time as I showed a whole lot. They really wanted people to be minimally pulled away from their regular daily work. It was very conversational, engaging, positive interviews, high-level questions drove good discussion. And then, as I mentioned, the valuable verification sessions that occurred near the end to ensure that they had a really good understanding that they had heard us and that we had the opportunity to provide feedback if they maybe misheard us on anything. And some improvements we provided are recommendations. It would be good to provide initial immediate definitions on the understanding of the approach. So getting a little more into the practice areas and helping educate when they say estimating, when they say planning, those types of terms. What does that mean in CMMI parlance? So a lot of discussion around just definition of terms. Expand the practice area briefing to better define what will be covered. High-level questions seem vague, so maybe a little more upfront education again to the site and to the participants. I mentioned terminology. And then pilot metrics, that's something that after you complete the appraisal, we have a quarterly check-in. And the metrics that we are to provide, there's still a lot of ambiguity around exactly what metrics we really want to capture and monitor on an ongoing basis. So I think that's going to be an evolving part of this program as well. All right, so what have we learned? It turns out our practices did line up pretty well with the CMMI model overall. Certainly some weaknesses were identified, and we're processing that internally to decide what that means to us and whether we want to take some serious action on some of those weaknesses. Those are primarily in the area of project and resource management, which is not, again, something that gets looked at really at all or very little in regards to an FDA inspection unless it's tied directly to a procedure. So that's an area that areas in our site did well, and other areas maybe had some opportunity. Cross-functional groups are engaging in really healthy conversations about our business practices and improvement opportunities. So there were some conversations that occurred cross-functionally, both during the appraisal as well as even after, that have been really healthy and good for us to consider, maybe some changes and some improvements in how we run new product development, how we run sustaining projects, how we run projects within operations, and so forth. It's important to gain alignment with other business functions on the value proposition to really help drive the change from appraisal results. So, again, an FDA inspection, if that were to lead to a 483, there's no question that the company is going to likely take some degree of action and through a CAPA, through the 483 response to the agency, that's pretty black and white. But in this case of an appraisal where you identify weaknesses that are potential improvement areas, and there are areas that are often outside of the quality system, they're more in our business processes and practices. Those are other stakeholders like R&D, PMO, operations, so forth, that it's good to get that alignment up front of here's what we're doing as part of this pilot and what we agree to do when we're provided an appraisal results, to look seriously at those results and make some calls on how we want to move forward. At the same time, a lot of stakeholders remain skeptical, naturally, of a pilot. For example, how will the CDRH benefits actually work and will they truly materialize? I know Cisco is working very diligently, both internally at FDA as well as with MDIC and CMMI to make that happen. Jeff Shuren has made it, quite clear that he's committed to make this work, and so we're plowing ahead. But obviously, the proof will be in the pudding when those things truly materialize. Will the pilot investment, dollars and time, be worth it? I think again, if those benefits truly bear out, it will be a no-brainer that it's worth it. What risk do we bring on by participating is always a natural concern, especially of quality organizational folks when it comes to, hey, what are we opening ourselves up to in this pilot? Will the quarterly metric reviews actually be value added? And I think the opportunity is for the industry to help really shape how that looks in partnership with the external groups. And then what will be expected of us down the road to maintain these benefits? Again, being part of this pilot, we can help shape that, and others who are participating can help shape that. So remember, right, this is a pilot. The plane is being built as we're flying it. So there's much still being figured out as we go. And I think there's an alignment of intent around improving patient outcomes amongst FDA, industry, and the external groups, MDIC and CMMI. So I think everyone wants this to be successful, and we're all working hard to do just that. But there is a lot that still has to be ironed out as we move through this pilot program. So that's what I wanted to share, and look forward to hearing from Cisco and then any questions that anyone asks about my perspective.
All right. Thanks, Joe. And I will now turn things over to Cisco Vicenty from CDRH to give us an update from CDRH's perspective on what they've learned so far from this pilot. Cisco?
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Joe and Kim, for the the previous updates and for sharing your stories and your experiences. I think one of the things that, you know, we want to try to do with these webinars in particular is really share the perspective from the manufacturer after they've gone through the experience. It's one thing for us to be saying, here's what it is, here's what it does, trying to explain that up front, but as I think, you know, you made very clear, George, this is a very radically different experience. So no matter what we say, it's very difficult for someone to grasp until they've gone through that process themselves. So it's much appreciated for you to share that story and put that forward. So one of the things that I think I want to take a few minutes to really address, I'd like to leave some time for questions, so we'll run through this very quickly, but is to really show what it is that we are doing with this internally as an agency, right? How are we looking at things differently, and what is it really enabling us to do? So starting with that, you know, here's just a quick visualization of what things might look like. Now, I really want to caveat for anybody who's on the line, this is not the actual outcomes that we've been seeing up until now. This is just really truthfully some randomization of things that we put in just to display what we're looking at internally, right? It really does give us a really great snapshot and benchmark comparatively across the participating sites. Not from the standpoint, again, of choosing where do we want to enforce, where do we want to enable additional compliance. That's not the activity here, and every participant here really has already established their compliance baseline. In fact, some of the participants we've got early data on have very good compliance histories over the past several years that have been shown to us. What we're looking to really do with this is really understand, okay, the compliance is established, those SOPs are there, the procedures are there, some of the overarching control that is expected from the regulation is there, but is it delivering enough? Is it really providing value? Is it connecting to the right places to make that not just the SOP that says you are compliant, but it really is the way you are doing business and achieving success with it. And then which areas might be, you know, unintentionally weakened or strengthened by the way the regulation is being applied. Where do we have opportunities collaboratively, not just, this is not an agency effort, to really get together and find ways to drive up those performance and drive up those behaviors in those areas. The one thing that I think has been really great about the use of the CMMI model and its application here is that it doesn't really prescribe your quality management system. That's done by the regulation. So that's already been set and established. It kind of sits above it and says, how well is all that actually executing? How are those behaviors that it's expected to drive really delivering? So from our standpoint, right, this is a great way to start looking at what does it take to move past that compliant activity. Who's doing it very well? You know, where are areas of struggle? We can actually compare now within manufacturers who are maybe all fully controlled class 3, which ones are all class 2, which ones have a mix of products, and how are they doing, and are we seeing patterns and similarities, and they're really good executed. We can really quickly see and show where the strengths are in that particular organization, where they might have other opportunities to improve. And I think the organization gets a much more detailed view than what we're seeing right now, but down the road, you know, I think the opportunity exists for them to even see and benchmark themselves among either other members within that same space, other participants within the medical device industry, and really figure out where do they need to be or where would they like to be from a provider and a manufacturer. From our standpoint, it really has enabled a completely different set of conversations internally. It really is looking at saying, oh, there's something going on in this particular process area. It's associated with these things. What is it that's driving that? If it's the way these are being applied, is it something that is just a perception that needs clarification? Is there something else that we should collaboratively be looking at? And so it's been a really very, very engaging opportunity within the center as a whole, right? This is not just a, you know, being run out of the compliance activities that we're doing here and what we're doing at this. We really are engaging with other parts of the center, with our review division, and figuring out where are the opportunities collectively that we can help move the needle. So just more detail on actually some of the things that we're seeing early on. And please, this is all very early data. This is just, you know, not so much a firm, this is really what's going on, but it seems like these are very quick patterns that emerged, you know, from the few that we've had so far and run through in the appraisals, but things that we're seeing as strengths. The medical device industry in these two practice areas seem to be doing very well in technical solutions and product integration. We can kind of surmise why that might be happening, at least from my perspective. When I look at what those practice areas enable, they really do hit a lot of the elements that maybe FDA investigators do a very good job of focusing on when they go in there. Where are we seeing opportunities? We're seeing them, you know, within the estimating, the implementation infrastructure activities. What does that mean? We still have work to do. Is that really even going to continue in that trend? Is it just the first few that we saw? It's something that we are keeping an eye on. But this whole different focus gives us an opportunity to really look at it from that standpoint versus our typical compliance efforts. You know, again, the performance is not necessarily dependent on product classification. So various manufacturers are performing very differently. It's not about the product or the product risk going through there. You know, we are learning that some participants are scoring very highly across some of the scope practice areas, which is bringing it back to us. Do we need to change the maturity level that we are looking at and appraising to as we move forward? Do we need to change the scope of the process areas? One of the things that I thought was phenomenal, and you know, Joe mentioned it, but you know, even within the organizations, there's a lot more sharing and collaboration, but we're actually seeing some of that happening across manufacturers. People starting to engage each other independently to start learning in areas where they're doing very well. And as I mentioned beforehand, it's a completely different discussion internally at FDA. The focus has now gone from, you know, do we need to enforce, to trying to understand what's driving that, and is there an opportunity here, whether it is enabling the collaboration, whether it is something the FDA needs to modify and change in order to drive the improvements. Lessons learned, we're still working on this, and this is something that was brought up early on, and we've always been aware of it, but you know, small manufacturers are experiencing cost concerns. As I mentioned beforehand, high maturity in the medical device space for some of the practice areas. You know, some of those areas may not be as value added for those manufacturers, and we need to figure out how to adapt that. We've encountered the possibility that once the enrollment happens and some of the benefits kick in, by no fault of their own, we know that resources are not always in the hands of the organizations enrolling. We've had to make modifications to when we kick in the resources, because we've had some manufacturers de-enroll because of constraints. We've learned internally that our internal inspection process has long lead times, and it needs a more active and continuous feedback mechanism that isn't in place right now in order to make sure that some of the modifications that we're putting in place actually kick in, because we have had instances where despite the appraisal, despite everything going on, either an inspection has been scheduled or things have gone on, and we've had to work quickly to try to either intercede or figure out what the intent of the inspection was. And then the last piece is, as mentioned beforehand, the metric submission and the discussion. Originally, it was confounding a lot of the appraisal. We still don't know if those metrics are going to give us the value add that we're looking for, as Joe mentioned. Even from an agency side, that's part of what we're looking to evaluate throughout the course of the pilot and learn from. So I think we've had to modify a little bit of the approaches on how we do things. So just to quickly run through this, CMMI has been developing some solutions to manage costs. So they are, you know, really coming up and thinking of new options, as well as some of the manufacturing participants have also been providing options in terms of how that can be managed. We are looking at modifying the scope of the appraisals and what practice areas get included. We are, again, modifying a little bit of when the actual modifications start, just to make sure that at least we get confirmation that the scoping is happening and the appraisal is going to happen before we modify the inspection listing. We're trying to get that system, we've implemented something now to make it a little bit more active in terms of notifications so that we try to reduce those errors. And then the other piece of it is we are going to start working individually with the participants probably around the same scoping space to discuss those metrics and submissions to clarify, I think, what we're looking to do. Quickly run through this. Next steps, we're going to continue some of these appraisals. We're going to keep adjusting the pilot as necessary. That's always the intent. We're going to start some of those first quarterly check-ins and see how they're working out, probably in March. We are modifying the submissions, and the first set of those modified submissions are hopefully starting this week so that we can test out that portion of the modification and then roll it out more broadly to participants. We want to expand the in-scope practice areas for the 510K space. And again, it's the metric submission. Is it correlating? What does it give us? Is it really driving value? Our goal with all of this has always been not to create a new compliance bar, right? It's really about rewarding that journey to improvement, not a destination. Last bit is we did get comments from the docket, and we are working to address that. Some of these quarterly metrics are actually part of helping provide a little bit more insight into transparency into what's going on. That was one of the comments coming through. But we'll be moving forward with some of the, addressing some of those and try to make that a little bit more visible to participants. So currently on it, again, it's just making sure we're sharing a bit more about what's happening. So it's increased that transparency. We are driving to see how we increase the application of this to the 510K space. And I think it was mentioned beforehand, right? How do we start to establish a better common vocabulary around these things to make things a little easier for everybody to interpret moving forward? For anybody who is interested, here are the additional links and various resources that you can provide feedback, contact, comment. We're always looking for feedback. It's really critical to helping drive this the right way. And I think with that, that is it from CDRH's side, and I'll turn it back over to Stephanie. I don't know if you want to try to manage if there's any questions across the board.
Great, thank you, Cisco. So we will open it up to questions. You have an opportunity to ask your questions via the chat box on your screen. And as we're waiting for a few questions to come in, I want to let all of you know that the recording from today's webinar and the slides will be made available on MDIC's website, and I will send an email to all registered attendees with that information once that's available, probably sometime next week. We also want to let you know about an upcoming event where we will be sharing more of our learnings from the pilot so far. This year at prior to the Xavier MedCon conference, we will be hosting a half-day pre-conference workshop where we'll be discussing the preliminary outcomes of this pilot and the future direction of the pilot study. Our first question, the discussion of the benefits shows that what seems to be process improvements. Is there any evidence yet to show that the pilot leads to specific evidence product quality gains?
So right now, and I'll start, I guess, and take a crack at it. We've started gathering some metrics that may possibly lead to that distinction. Again, we're in the early stages. Everything's being reported quarterly. The types of process improvements that are being modified and changed are also being tracked a little bit more granularly than what would have been done beforehand to try to get to that distinction. So we've got some thoughts, we've got some metrics around it that may give us the insight, but right now we're just starting to collect those types of metrics, and we don't have any clear data on that just yet.
Another question, what was the common area that improvement is needed in the pilot studies so far? Or is there a common area, I guess I can.
So as I mentioned beforehand, maybe Kim and George might be able to step in a little bit with more detail, but the areas around, I think, the estimating seems to be very common across the board.
Yeah, this is George Zack. So one, I would caution that while we're definitely very much looking at the data from a trend perspective, we have to all recognize that we've, as Kim stated at the start of the presentation, there have been 6 executed in this particular pilot thus far. And so coming up with anything of great statistical relevance for 6 across 5 different organizations, 6 facilities across 5 organizations, we have to treat that a little bit carefully. As Cisco said, estimating is clearly an area in which some sort of consistency, and then also that implementation infrastructure. So those are the activities that really support your process and make the process, the processes that you have in place institutionalized or habit, if you will. So it's the policies, the plans, the resources, the training, the configuration management tools, all those things that are necessary for a well-vetted process. I think also to maybe tie that back to the prior question, we have to also consider that, right? We're all very interested in that golden ticket that takes, we'd love to be able to say, hey, organizations that have this specific process or practice weakness are more likely to demonstrate these particular quality issues. And again, we have at this point we have a small set. We're definitely interested in trying to drive to that understanding if there's that sort of correlation. But at the same time, recognize that there's going to be differences from organization to organization in terms of what types of activities that they're doing, what types of products they're producing, the risk of those particular products. So that's a very active conversation as well within our working groups. One I'd love more industry participants to be playing in on to unpack that data. And I think it also ties into potentially some of the analytics effort. That's also another working group of the MDIC case for quality efforts.
Yeah, George, and thank you for that. I mean, I can't stress what George just mentioned enough either, right? This is not statistically significant. This is not something that we're driving a lot of huge, you know, this is the area that we must target effort in. It really is just, this is something that started to show up very quickly, very early, and it's of interest. It's something that helps enable a discussion that across the board. And what I wanted to highlight was, you know, that's the potential that we've got with how this is being leveraged and applied.
Great, thank you. I have a couple more questions that have come in. Our first one, do FDA inspections provide any benefits that the pilot appraisals don't provide? If not, then why not fully adopt CMMI appraisals instead of inspections, since per FDA and companies, those appraisals are better than inspections?
So that's a great question. It seems a little loaded with a lot of situations. So there's still elements within the establishment of where you are within an operating quality management system and what's within the regulations that's really part of that FDA inspection. The CMMI model, again, it doesn't prescribe what that system needs to look like, and that quality management system has been developed, you know, with years of looking into what are the pieces and elements that need to be in place, even at a base level for a corporation, any organization trying to get into the space, in order to at the very least make sure that they've got all the things considered to deliver a safe and effective product. So I'm not stating that down the road, years from now, there may be some opportunities for better alignment, for anything along those lines, but as it stands right now, I think there is still a need for establishing that baseline set of compliance, what the regulations mean, what they're intended to deliver, and then, you know, adding on to this moving forward, if that helps at least clarify where my perspective is. I think we've still got more data and more work to do before we state blanketly we've gotten a new adoption of a new mechanism. And the other piece of that is that becomes then the new compliance bar if that's what we do things to, and I don't know if that's the intent or the same value proposition at that point in time.
Great, thank you. I think I maybe throw in one more question. I know a couple of people started to log off, but we have one last question. For electronic quality management systems supporting medical device manufacturers for audit, defense, or compliance, how does this appraisal approach impact or change the way companies will look at or expect from these systems in the future?
This is George. I can take a crack at that. I think so. And just trying to unpack that question a little bit. So this quality systems, you know, such as like electronic quality system, we're talking about something that's like a master control or one of these other things that manages the quality system, document control, as well as CAPA management, that sort of thing. Is that your understanding of the question, Stephanie?
I think so, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and I think, again, it dovetails a little bit off of what Cisco was just saying there, is that the framework is not necessarily telling you whether you should use one of those systems or not. Some organizations, that's very much part and parcel of how they manage their quality system, and it needs to be considered in terms, again, of the infrastructure to support the processes that are in place. It certainly is not necessarily going to be the case for all medical device manufacturers. Many small ones may have very much a paper-based system. So I think the framework is flexible I know the framework is flexible in that it can assess systems that are either electronic or manual, and as appropriate with the processes that the practices it describes, make recommendations as to how to improve those. But it certainly is not going to be requiring of a particular electronic quality system.
Yeah, and this is Cisco. If I could just quickly add to that, I think that just from an FDA standpoint, right, there's always benefits. There is a lot of potential benefit in the adoption and implementation of any type of automation through these processing systems. I think what it does, at least from our standpoint, I think George hit on it significantly, it does improve your capability to connect, right? It does improve your capability to really get to some of that information faster, probably in a lot more reliable and traceable format. So it does get you those demonstrations of that connectedness, and maybe sometimes in those systems they kind of force habit also at the same time. So it might show that a lot faster and a lot better, but I don't think from an FDA standpoint or even from a model standpoint, it's really dependent on a system or a set of systems in order to achieve certain execution levels.
Great. Well, thank you to our speakers. We are a few minutes over, and thank you all for joining us today for this first quarterly update on the CDRH pilot. As we said, our intention is to make this a quarterly event to keep you all updated about the progress and the learnings from this pilot initiative. Slides and the recording from today's webinar will be available on MDIC's website in the next week. Thank you for joining us.